Mr. Minister, I wanted to turn to the so-called BRIC nations, of course, of which you are a part. Of course, BRIC stands for it's an acronym, of course, coming to symbolize the shift in global power away from the developed G7 countries. It involves Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Right now, it seems more like an economic grouping, but does it have the objective, do you have the intention of moving beyond economics and functioning more as a political bloc?
You're right to point out that it started out as an economic grouping, and the most intense coordination takes place, for example, in discussions related to the quota regime at the IMF and the World Bank and G20 issues. However, as the BRICS meet more frequently at summit level and a number of subgroups are created, the political agenda is coming into play. There was another circumstance that contributed to this, the fact that they were all in the Security Council last year. Of course, Russia and China are permanent members, but Brazil, India, and South Africa were non-permanent during 2011, and this created a favorable context for closer coordination. It doesn't mean that positions are identical, it doesn't mean that we vote necessarily in the same way, but I think the consensus among the BRICS is that there's benefit to be derived from closer coordination, closer exchange of views on issues. I would also point out to another group Brazil participates in, which is the IBSA group, India, Brazil, South Africa. It's smaller, and it has a transformational agenda that perhaps the BRICS doesn't have in terms of promoting reform of the Security Council, more democratic governance, and it has also been acting together in promoting small scale, but nevertheless significant projects helping least developed countries. There are projects in Haiti, in the Palestinian occupied territories, in Sri Lanka and elsewhere. I think it's a demonstration of these three countries' desire to assume greater responsibility in favor of peace and development worldwide and in strengthening the multilateral system.
That's a very interesting point, because I would imagine that at some point Brazil could perhaps have some conflict with a couple of the countries in BRIC, perhaps China and Russia, vis-a-vis their record on human rights and other positions that perhaps Brazil would be less comfortable in trying to reconcile its positions on.
Well, conflict would not be a word that I would use in this context. There are differences that are determined by historic evolution. And as I was saying yesterday at the American Jewish Committee, when it comes to human rights, our starting point, our assumption is that everywhere in the world, or in every country, there's progress to be made. Whether you're highly developed, where you're still a rural or least developed country. And I mentioned Guantanamo in the United States. There are xenophobic tendencies in Europe. We have our own challenges in our prison system in Brazil. Others will have different challenges. The important thing is for us to do this in a multilateral environment, free from selective finger pointing, and in a way that will enhance cooperation and will actually have an impact for the people who are suffering human rights violations or threats of human rights violations.